Erev Tov Rabotai, we are continuing with our Mishna Yomi, Masechet Eruvin. We are up to Perek Zayin, Mishnah Yud. Today's Mishnah should be Le'ilun Nishmat, Neria ben Svetlana, Ranbay, Neliyahu ben Burcha Israelov, Menuchatam beGan Eden, Amen. The Mishnah discusses which foods one may use to make an Eruv or Shituf. Bakol Me'arvin Umishtatefin. All foods may be used to make an Eruvei Techumin or a Shitufei Mevo'ot. Chutz min ha'mayim u'min ha'melach, except water and salt, because the commentators explain they are not considered significant foods. Now, they explain in Eruvei Techumin and a Shitufei Mevod both establish a Shabbat residence because a person is considered to dwell where his food is kept. Since water and salt do not nourish, they would not be eaten alone as a meal, and therefore they do not qualify as food for this purpose. Additionally, the commentators explain all breads may be used for Eruvei Chatzerot, whether whole loaves or broken loaves. Divrei Rabbi Eliezer, these are the words of Rabbi Eliezer. And the commentators explain that the ruling any food may be used to make an Eruvei, etc., refers primarily to Eruvei Techumin, but secondarily to Eruvei Chatzerot as well. However, its meaning is not the same for both Eruvs. Regarding Eruvei Techumin, it means that all foods may be used, whereas regarding Eruvei Chatzerot, it means that all bread may be used, whether whole or broken loaves. Now, an Eruvei Chatzerot, however, must be made with bread, as the Gemara says on page 71b in Masechet Eruvin, for the following reason. An Eruvei Chatzerot symbolically joins all the residents of the courtyard into one primary living place, the house where the Eruv is placed. Therefore, it must be made with bread, because a person's primary living place is determined by his bread, which is his main sustenance. A shituf, on the other hand, joins all the courtyards into one. Since the courtyard is not a person's primary living place, all types of foods may be used to join them, and this is how Rashi explains it there on page 71b. The Mishnah continues, is Rabbi Yoshua Omer, but Rabbi Yoshua says, Kikar hu eruv, only a whole loaf of bread may be used for an eruvei chatzerot, not a broken loaf. Afilu ma'afeh se'ah, therefore even a huge loaf baked from a se'ah of flour, which the commentators explain, a se'ah equals the volume of 144 average size eggs, and the Mishnah mentions an exaggerated amount in order to illustrate that no matter how large the bread, it does not suffice if the loaf is broken, which the Mishnah says, Afilu ma'afeh se'ah, even a huge loaf baked from a se'ah of flour, v'ifirusa, and it's broken, and marvin ba, like we said, it may not be used for an eruvei chatzerot if it is broken. Kikar bi'isar, however, even a tiny loaf the size of an isar, a small coin, v'u shalem marvin bo, it may be used as an eruv if it is whole. And the Rav explains even very small loaves may be used as long as enough of them are contributed to meet the minimum amount that we stated in Mishnah 8. Now, Rabbi Yeshua requires whole loaves for an eruv because residents who contributed complete loaves might resent those who contributed only broken loaves, and therefore in order to promote harmony, Rabbi Yeshua rules that everyone must contribute whole loaves. And the Rav does tell us, V'alacha ke Rabbi Yehoshua, the halacha follows the opinion of Rabbi Yehoshua. And that is in a Mishnah Yud. Mishnah Yud Aleph now discusses purchasing a share in an eruv in advance. Noten adam ma'a lachenvani v'lenachtom. A person may give a ma'a, a small silver coin, to a grocer or a baker, which the Rav explains the grocer sells wine, which may be used for a shituf, and the baker sells loaves of bread, which may be used for an eruv. Kedesh yizakeh lo eruv. Again, a person may give a ma'ah to a grocer or a baker, so that when the other residents of his courtyard come to buy food for the eruv, he will own a part of the eruv, meaning the storekeeper will add the portion he paid for, thereby making him part of the eruv. Now, the Rav explains the person paid in advance for food to be contributed to the eruv on his behalf. He did not take possession of the food. Rather, he stipulated that when the other residents of the courtyard buy food from the storekeeper for the eruv, he should give them the portion that was paid for. Now, although movable objects such as food cannot usually be acquired simply by paying for them, the rabbis allowed it in this case in order to make it easier to make an eruv. Divrei Rabbi Eliezer, these are the words of Rabbi Eliezer. And the commentators explain on the biblical level, a person can gain ownership of something simply by paying for it. However, the rabbis invalidated monetary payment as a means for acquiring mitatel, immovable property, and instead required mishicha, pulling the object, or hagba'ah, lifting the object, for the reason explained by the Gemara on page 81b. Now, Rabbi Eliezer teaches that the rabbis were lenient regarding Eruv and allowed the biblical method to be effective. V'chachamim omrim, but the sages, they disagree and they say, Lo zechulo meotav, his money does not acquire a share in the Eruv for him. According to the sages, no special leniency was made for making an Eruv, and therefore the portion the storekeeper gave on his behalf never belonged to the person who gave the ma'ah, and he thus has no share in the Eruv. Umodim b'shar kol adam. However, the sages agree that if he paid another person who is not a grocer or baker to acquire a portion of the Eruv on his behalf, shezachulo meotav, that his money enables him to own a portion of the Eruv food. Since ordinary people do not sell food, the person giving the money clearly intended to pay the other person to be his agent to acquire a portion of the Eruv on his behalf with the proper method of acquisition and then give it for the Eruv. For example, the commentators explain so that he should purchase food from someone else and lift it and then contribute it to the Eruv, or that the agent should give his own food and grant this person possession of it by having the person collecting the Eruv lift it on his behalf, like we explained in Mishnah 6. The money provided was for the service rather than as a payment for the food. Since the person giving the ma'ah was not buying food but simply paying someone to arrange an eruv for him in the proper manner by making a proper transaction, the food contributed by the agent did belong to the one paying him, and the agent acquires the ma'ah not as payment for the food but as a fee for his efforts. Now, the ruling of the sages implies that when the person giving the ma'ah pays a grocer or baker, the eruv is invalid for him, even if the shopkeeper makes the eruv himself using his own food and grants the possession of it to all the residents of the courtyard or alley, including the person who paid him. Now, for example, the commentators explain, let's say the storekeeper himself is a resident of the corridor alley. When he sees that it's necessary to make an eruv or shituf, he gives his own food on behalf of everyone and grants possession of it to all the residents of his corridor alley as the eruv or shituf. But like we said, the sage's ruling implies that the eruv would be invalid for him, even if the shopkeeper makes it himself when he pays the grocer or baker. And the sages explain why. She'en ma'arvin adam ele midato. This is because we cannot use a person's possessions to make an eruv for him without his consent. Since the person gave the money to buy food and that was not effective, even if the storekeeper would give food for him to the eruv collector and grant ownership of it, keeping the money as his fee, that too would not be effective. And the commentators explain, since the storekeeper wants to keep the money he was paid, when he grants ownership of the food to all the residents of the court, he does so with the understanding that he's granting it to everyone else for free, but it is doing so for the person who paid him only as an agent receiving a fee. However, that's not what the person paid him to do. Now, this is because the storekeeper would be using, the reason we said it's not effective is because the storekeeper would be using the person's money in a way that he had not authorized him to do. The storekeeper would be using that person's money to make an eruv for him without his consent, and according to the sages, they say this is not effective. Now, although the person obviously does not mind spending a ma'ah for his eruv, he did not authorize the storekeeper to spend the money in this way, and therefore the eruv that gets made as a result is considered an eruv made using the person's money without his consent. Amar Rabbi Yehuda disagrees. He said, "B'mei dvarim amurim." When was it said that we cannot use a person's property to make an eruv for him without his consent? Be'eruvet tichumin. Only with regard to eruvet tichumin, because it's not a clear benefit to the owner, since an eruvet tichumin extends his tichum in one direction, but limits it in the opposite direction. Now, since that's the case, the Rav explains, therefore, since he may prefer his original tichum, making an eruvet tichumin for him is not a clear benefit. Aval be'eruvet chatzerot. But with regard to Eruvin Chatzerot, which is a clear benefit to a person, since it allows him to carry from his house into the courtyard, we may make an Eruv for a person with or without his consent. Which the commentators explain, according to Rabbi Yehuda, making an Eruvin Chatzerot is clearly beneficial to a person, even when using his food or money. The sages disagree and they rule that it's not a clear benefit for a person to have his food or money used for an eruv, including Eruvin Chatzirot. But back to Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, why does Rabbi Yehuda allow it, even to make an eruv for a person with or without his consent? Because the rule is that we may benefit a person without his consent, but we may not disadvantage a person without his consent. Now, this is a principle that applies in all legal matters. We can perform an act on someone else's behalf even without his express consent if it's a clear benefit to him, but in such a case, his consent can be assumed when it's a benefit, and we may not disadvantage a person without his consent, because that's not to his benefit. And the Rav does tell us, V'alachak Rabbi Yehuda, the halakha does follow the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. And that is in Rabotai of today's Mishna Yomi. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen v'amen.